Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for this special screening of Feels Good Man. Films directed by Arthur Jones and written by Giorgio Angelini, who are both going to be joining us for a Q&A after the screening. So be sure to keep around for that. The runtime is only about an hour and a half, so Q&A should start around, I guess that's 7:30. And look out for more screenings coming up. I know we have a few over the next few weeks, so be sure to come back. And I guess without further ado, let's start the show. Thanks. Oh, I just heard a noise.
Okay, how's that?
There we go.
Okay, all right, that's good. Hopefully that will be better. I apologize to those who are watching.
No, these things happen.
How's this?
Casualty of the Zoom era.
Yes, so many apologies, but I appreciate all of you watching Feels Good Man. So
yeah, this was great. I absolutely love this documentary. I happen to be working on a paper on incel communities, so it's
oh really?
Yeah, it's quite interesting to sort of watch it through this this lens. For those listening who don't know, incel stands for involuntarily celibate. It's like a different segment that we seem to touch upon in this film with Bill, right? Is that the guy?
His name is Mills. I mean, it is interesting. Sort of the phrase incel became popularized because of this incident in Toronto, where a 4chan user, Alec Manassian, rented a van and committed a act of mass violence. Excuse me, I'm letting the dog out of the. But anyway, so that was actually kind of happening while we were filming, and you know, Mills, who is in the film, is a 4chan board guy, and he and I'm telling you this as someone with a little bit of insider knowledge. He was on this board R9K, which is an incel specific board on 4chan. And so, yeah, it was interesting to observe him observing that moment for sure. And also how this like sort of subculture was all of a sudden becoming like things that people were talking about all over the world. Yeah, it was weird. When we were first talking to him, there were a couple other terms that were being thrown around. One is MGTOW, which is men going their own way, and another thing called true and forced loneliness. And so those were the things that we had sort of spoken to Mills about specifically. But it's this idea that these guys, they feel as though they don't have any choice. They feel as though society has sort of put them into this position. And some of these guys get increasingly desperate, and we've had some terrible things happen because of it.
Yeah, it's I mean, hearing the way he talks about stuff of like the violence against normies, and I noticed he talked about these despicable girls who came in, like there was such misogyny, such resentment towards the women for using this symbol. So it was so fascinating to kind of see it from that angle.
Well, you know, I think when he's calling the people that he refers to as despicable, I don't think are only women in that situation. He's talking about sort of a larger phenomenon that was happening in like 2015. And that was something where basically there was this group of extremely online young people who had sort of really, they self-identified as internet users. This was kind of their own particular subculture. And then social media really blew all the doors off of everything. Like people had obviously been on Facebook and stuff, but there was this moment where like all of a sudden everyone was on Instagram. It really felt as though the internet was becoming an actual public place, not a place for these individual subcultures. And they basically felt like their subculture was getting invaded or co-opted. And so when I think he says despicable, he's just kind of talking about like a different sort of group of internet user who all of a sudden they felt like were participating in this place that they had basically had as their own safe space, you know? So yeah, it definitely is representative of the misogyny in the community. And also he's sort of talking about a period in time that also Gamergate came out of. And we decided not to get too deeply into Gamergate in the film, but you know, within this audience of people that we're talking to right now, they probably have some knowledge of that as a phenomenon. So so yeah, that it's his feelings are for just a larger kind of like mainstreaming of the internet, women included within that.
I do want to get into the entry of how you landed on Pepe specifically, but since we're on this topic of Mills, I'm curious kind of how you infiltrated that sort of community and really got someone to interview for it too. I mean, I think I have a lot of questions about sort of casting of interviews,
Sure.
but I think he especially was a really interesting one. I'm curious how you kind of got him.
He was interesting, and we got lucky with Mills. You know, I'd initially started reaching out to people who had trolled Matt Furie, like anyone that had written Matt a nasty message from 4chan. I started reaching out to them, and in general, people weren't willing to talk, or I would just get in these kind of like bad faith arguments with folks. And then I hit 4chan and just started trying to figure out like how to find a voice from within the community, because I'd watched a bunch of documentary films about 4chan or, you know, kind of anonymous internet weirdness. And I just felt like it was a lot of journalists kind of talking about these guys in the basements or whatever. And I was very passionate about trying to find someone who felt like they were really like a, you know, a primary subject within this community. And Mills is someone who is a inboard meme. He's a meme on 4chan, because most of the people on 4chan like to be anonymous. They don't put their picture on 4chan. They don't put their real name on 4chan. But Mills' picture was on 4chan, and so you know, he had some archived videos, and I found that video of him laying in bed talking to his phone, saying, "What does Pepe mean to me?" And that was a video that had only been viewed maybe a couple dozen times. And when I saw that video, there was just something that grabbed me about it. It was an intimate video. It was a dramatic video, and I just had a feeling he would be in the film. So I reached out to him. I found his email. It wasn't too hard to find, but I found his email, and then we started talking initially on background, and then slowly he came around to the idea of being in the film. Oh, I can't hear you. You got to unmute.
I'm muted. I forgot I muted.
Right on. Right on.
So you said you'd watched a few different documentaries kind of about this alt-right community and Gamergate, and like sort of seen this journalistic perspective. So was the interest in sort of this community, did that precede the interest in Pepe as sort of your narrative through line, or was it Pepe specifically that triggered the sort of narrative of the documentary?
It was Pepe specifically and Matt. So I had no real interest in making a documentary about sort of 4chan or even what was going on in the 2015, 2016 moment. But I had been a fan of Matt Furie's comic books, probably from about 2007 or 2008. And I had bought issues of Boys Club before it was ever a meme, before he put it on MySpace. And I had become friends with Matt through some mutual friends and through my girlfriend, Carrie, when I moved to California. She had actually, some of the archival footage of Matt was stuff that she had shot, which was another kind of amazing coincidence within all this. And they were friends in the San Francisco Mission in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so I'd become friends with Matt, and I'd kind of observed what was going on with Pepe. And you have to keep in mind, like, you know, when I was hanging out with Matt, like in 2013 or 2014, he was pretty over Pepe. He was moving on other things. He was a young father. He was trying to kind of separate himself from the character, but the character just kept coming back to haunt him. And so the idea for the film came from that. But then I had not ever been on 4chan before, but I was a very conservative teenager. I was kind of like proto red pilled when I was probably like 14 or 15. And my dad is like a very conservative, kind of like Trumpy dude. And so I was a little bit obsessed with what was going on, because I saw what was going on with my father, who'd been like a Bob Dole Republican, and all of a sudden he was like very into Donald Trump. And that fascinated me. So I thought this was like a unique way to kind of maybe explore those ideas that were going on in America as well.
And you're an illustrator or an animator as well. I saw your name on the credit, one of the animators.
Yeah, yeah, that that was the thing. Like, this is my first film, and that's the thing that I thought I could lend to this story that would be unique to that another documentarian could not do. Yeah, I'm an animator. I did all the motion graphics in the film, and then all of the cartoons that you see that are based on Matt's artwork. I collaborated with. I did some of those, and then I worked with 3 other animators to create those. And so, yeah, that was the other thing that the idea for Making Feels Good Man is, I mean, I'm a cartoonist. I've always loved cartoons. I've always seen cartoons as something that was important in culture. And I think cartoons people often just sort of dismiss as being like lowbrow or not something that's really worthy of dissection. And this was a chance for me to make a movie about how important cartoons are. And so that was something that I was excited about.
And what kind of a perfect ending it led to too, of like you kind of get the happy ending with it, which clearly you couldn't have planned for in some way because you started well before that phenomenon took place.
That is true. We got a Deus Ex Machina, which I think is like very rare. I mean, it. There's kind of 2 different endings. There's the cultural ending, and then the ending that's a little bit more specific to Matt. And so certainly we were struggling. Like, we had tried a few different edits of like how to sort of like stick the ending of like, where is Pepe now? Because we knew. I think it's a problem with a lot of documentary films is like, where do you end it? It's an unfolding story. Pepe has continued to change even since we finished this film. But so Hong Kong happened, and it was something that I think was a surprise to absolutely everyone. And so that story unfolded very quickly. And it just so happened that Aaron Sankin, who's a journalist who was a talking head in the film, who he kind of walks you through the moment that Pepe becomes Trump on 4chan. He just moved to Hong Kong. And so it was just kind of a perfect coincidence. This was happening in Hong Kong. Aaron just moved to Hong Kong. We found a great videographer, Diana Chan, through like friends of friends. And the next thing you know, we have an inbox filled with this amazing footage of this Pepe protest that was this 2-mile long human chain where everyone was holding a Pepe as part of the human chain. And then the edit that you see in the film is pretty much the first draft of the edit we did, and we submitted to Sundance like a day later. So that whole section really felt like there was some meme magic at work in that section, if you will.
You mentioned magic. I'm going to use that as my transition to one
Great.
of the people you interviewed, which was Michael Greer. I think that he was such an interesting addition, and something like I wouldn't have even thought to have included in this kind of a thing. So I'd love to just have you unpack kind of the decision to cast him and include this sort of like spiritual, mystical element.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to spend the rest of this conversation talking about John, I would happily do it. He was another gift to the film the same way Hong Kong was. So, to dial back before we brought John into the film, there was this moment where 4chan has always had this very, very complicated attachment to imagery. 4chan started as something called an image board, and people would post image macros. And you have to think this was a time in the internet when it was actually pretty hard to post images and text in the same place at the same time, or at least it wasn't as common. This is like pre-Facebook. And so image making has always been part of 4chan, and people would create these like elaborate in-jokes that would last for years and years and years that have hundreds of images and messages layered on top of each other. And so Pepe became this thing where people were anonymous on 4chan. Pepe was their face, their identity. And people put a certain importance onto Pepe because of that. Pepe became like the deity of 4chan almost. And so people started to attribute all of these other like esoteric movements from the last, 3,000 years onto Pepe. So there was this thing on 4chan where people would talk about meme magic. They would refer to Pepe as Kek, who is this ancient god of chaos. And of course, these were all jokes, but the jokes actually kind of begin to become more and more substantive. And this is a group of people that spends 12, 13 hours at a time on this board. dealing in this iconography. And I think there's something to be said about that. And so we always wanted to find someone who is maybe going to be able to talk about meme magic in this broader cultural idea. And John Michael Greer was someone that initially our producer Giorgio Angelini found, and then we read a bunch of his stuff, and he'd written pretty specifically about Pepe and Keck. And it just so happened that he had moved to Providence, Rhode Island, which is where I had gone to college. And we were able to film him in a library that was a block away from where I used to live as a student. And it's called the Providence Athenaeum, and it's where Edgar Allan Poe used to write his poetry. It just has its own like unique witchy New England vibe. And so we filmed him in there in the middle of the night, and it was a really kind of, it had its own kind of emotional weight to it. It was an interesting interview. It was a fun interview. It was a short interview because he came in just like he knew exactly what he wanted to say and how he wanted to say it. So, and apologies if I'm sort of like, if this is long-winded, hopefully it's interesting.
That's great.
But the other thing that we wanted to do in putting him in the film is, for this film to work, we felt like you had to actively engage the audience. And to actively engage the audience, you wanted people to kind of make connections of their own. Like we wanted everything to have like, you know, there'd be sections in the movie where we're like, we're going to let the internet tell this story, but we want this to, you also see our hand in it. So you want us to think about the media and the way media travels, why we're also telling you this story. And so that's a section where it's like, oh, as you as a viewer, when you see John on the screen, are you like, do I believe him? Why did these guys put him in the movie? Is this something I'm going to listen to? Was this a wrong choice? Was this a right choice? Do I like this? Do I not? And I think it actually kind of like solidifies your relationship with the film. And the way you're sort of like processing the information we're putting forth. So that's a lot of things we were thinking when we put him in the movie.
Well, and it also matches kind of the, I don't know, it matches sort of the tone of what happened with this creation, you know, sort of how it took on this true spirit and like really kind of propelled into this I don't know, it propelled into something that was so beyond the normal capacity of how we think about meme culture.
Yeah, it's how do you talk about collective imagination?
Yeah.
You know, and it is this story about a really dumb stone cartoon frog, but it's also a story about the most serious things that are going on in culture at the same time. And it was also something just simultaneously to that, like, you know, Matt is someone who doesn't necessarily pay attention to politics in a like sort of, you know, he's not like looking at Twitter to see what Donald Trump just said, but he is someone that is reading kind of like a variety of things. And we felt like having John Michael Greer in there was maybe like more of a deep time way of talking about the things that Matt Furie is actually kind of more interested in, and the things that he thought would maybe be kind of fascinating about the Pepe story. So he was doing a lot of work. And then also it's like, we come out of a section of the movie that's pretty heavy. And then all of a sudden you have this wonderful wizardy kind of character, and it's a moment of like release, which is what you want to do as a filmmaker, is like you create drama, you create release, you create drama, you create release. So he was this kind of wonderful moment of surprise that hopefully people will you know, be curious about. Yeah.
Well, you're right about how, you know, especially for documentarians, that creation of tensions and dramas and how those sort of rise and fall throughout is, I think, a really tough thing in general, but especially with the amount of like footage and all the other stuff you're kind of throwing in this. I think I want to start kind of by asking, just to get a sense of the timeline of how you went about the process of your interviews and versus like collecting sort of background research and things like that.
Yeah, so before we started filming, I started to do a bunch of research on the film, and that was in the spring of 2017. And in the spring of 2017, I started to talk to Dale Baran, who was the kind of cultural talking head that we have in the film. You see him drawing Pepe, and he makes the thing about Pepe having too many lines. So I started talking to Dale. And then I also started to hang out on 4chan, basically. Like, you know, I'd hang out in the studio on the couch and just kind of like surf 4chan, and I started to read about 4chan, a number of books. I started to watch a lot of documentaries. Most of the documentaries I was watching were sort of about the post-Charlottesville moment. You know, and that was a big part of the inspiration for this film too. Charlottesville was so messed up that there was a moment where I felt like, you know, all of the zeitgeist was on fire and Pepe was somehow in the middle of all of it. I thought that was like, could be a really powerful story. I found that to be inspirational. And so, yeah, so I spent several months researching, and I spent the summer researching it. And then I pitched the idea of making a documentary to, I think, Matt and I in July of 2017. And then we started shooting in November. And for the first year we were making it, I was financing it with Giorgio, who is the producer on the film. And we were just like working 2 or 3 different jobs. And it was the thing we do on the weekends and in the evenings. And I was pretty obsessed with the film, getting it made. And then after about a year, we were working on it. We were able to have about an hour-long cut of the movie, and then we were able to bring in Karen Capitosto, and she's a producer on the film, and she has a deep knowledge of all these people in documentary filmmaking. She's great, and she helped us find like our way into the industry. She helped us figure out who to approach to maybe help us get to fund the film. So yeah, it was about a 1.5 year long process before, you know, it could basically be our job to make the movie.
So how much did your concept of how this story is going to work change from that sort of initial hour-long cut you had?
Well, you know, before the hour-long cut, while I was sort of on the couch looking at 4chan, I'd actually written a really like insane, looking back on it, a pretty insane document. I wrote a 40-page outline / essay / just kind of like, you know, soul purging kind of like document. And that's what I gave to Matt and Ayana. I was like, here is this thing that I've been thinking about. Here's this big idea, and I don't know exactly what it means, but the document was like a pretty imaginative thing. It was like, it's kind of the hero's journey of Pepe. It's like the Joseph Campbell version of Pepe mixed with all this other like wild information that I was pulling from talking to like various journalists and various people on 4chan on background, even talking to like a couple like straight up neo-Nazis on background. Like it was a document that was fantastical, and none of that is in the film. None of it. And then the first hour, the first cut we did, maybe the first 15 or 20 minutes of the movie is pretty spot on. And then we started to get into the Isla Vista section. And from there on, we really kind of did a tremendous amount of like recalibration and discussion and trying to figure out kind of what our way into the darker elements of the story was. And so that was that section was a very like difficult section to edit. And we spent a very long time thinking about how to tackle that kind of stuff. But yeah, the first 20 minutes was actually pretty representative of what's in the movie.
Let's talk a little more about actually I was in such an important area when talking about really intense documentary subjects. I want to talk about kind of your, for lack of a better term, your mental health through the process. And just sort of like, it's such a burden to sort of go through communities where there's such vitriol and kind of negativity.
Yeah.
I think that has the ability to kind of impact your own thought process, and kind of like that can be really tough. And then also just like dealing with content that like it's draining at some level. So I'd love to just sort of hear about, I'm leaving it kind of open-ended in that way, but just sort of how that kind of worked for you.
Yeah, let me, I'll just try to answer it as honestly as I can. I mean, there were kind of 2 different things while we were making the film. The first thing was obviously, you know, researching this content, and then also like having conversations with people who I felt like really kind of offended by. That was kind of one part of it. And there was a second part of it that was equally difficult, which was just like figuring out a way to get the movie made and figuring out a way to like get the right people to work on the film and also keep the whole team, unified. So it was like, that was also its own set of stresses. And a lot of that was actually very positive. Like I loved working with everyone who worked on the film, but it was a whole different kind of like, switch that you would have to make, so the research of the film was kind of one difficulty. And then the, how to get the film made and keep everyone on the same page and to keep everyone like happy and motivated was a whole other part of it. And I'm someone who is actually quite similar to Matt Furie. Like I'm a cartoonist and animator. I'm kind of most happy when my head is in a project, when I'm in the studio late at night and the lights are off and the music's loud and I'm working on something. And to make a feature film is actually the opposite of that. You have to be like open and listen to people and answer a million questions during the day. And that was actually something that that was a big shift for me professionally. But in terms of the 4chan stuff, so I have to say that my research initially, nothing on 4chan necessarily surprised me, in part because I'd been like a pretty like self-loathing kind of nihilistic teenager, and I had maybe participated in some of this stuff. I hadn't participated in like being a white supremacist, but I definitely participated in being like a dark, edgy, angry teenager. And I felt as though a lot of my 20s and becoming an artist was leaving that behind and like opening myself up to a whole new world. And so that stuff, while it's terrible, I didn't find any of it personally disturbing because it was maybe something that I'd already moved past in my life. But I, yeah, I mean, I started to see a therapist during seeing this film for the first time, and that was very helpful. And I also have to say that like the group of people who worked on this film became a little family. And we all had each other. So like Caitlin Ward, who was our assistant editor on it, and she got bumped up to co-producer and then post-production supervisor because she kept getting better and better at things. Like there would be moments where it's like, I can't go on 4chan anymore, Caitlin, can you do it? And she would. And so we would have like a dialogue about it. And so there were a lot of those kind of moments where we had each other to talk about it. And there definitely were times where we'd all go to the bar afterwards and be like, wow, this was a heavy day. How much Alex Jones footage did you have to watch? So yeah, long-winded answer, but yeah, it was.
I appreciate you kind of diving deep into it.
Yeah.
I actually think that documentarians should put their therapy bill in as part of the budget of a film.
I agree with you.
It's like training, like you need it. It's an important thing.
It really is. It really is. I did not realize the tension that I was carrying. I mean, there's those pictures of like a president after they've served their term. And if you see pictures of me like in 2017 before the film started, and now I'm like heavier, I'm grayer, I'm like, I mean, I love the movie. I'm thrilled with that it's connecting with people. But yeah, it was a self-actualizing project, which was awesome. But it was also definitely like a very intense, transformative project as well.
I want to invite our audience to type some questions of theirs into our question box. I'm going to turn it over to them in a sec, but
that's great.
While we're on the topic of kind of the group of support you had built around you, your crew members.
Yeah.
This was your first feature film. So I'd love to hear just kind of how you built that network together, to where you found people, how you knew them.
Yeah, I mean, so I come to filmmaking through a pretty roundabout kind of path. I went to art school and I was a painting major in art school. I was like a figurative oil painter. And then after I got out of art school, I became a designer, which I think a lot of fine artists do. They figure out like, oh, the way to make money in this world is to become a designer. So I was a graphic designer for about 10 years. And I'd always been drawing like cartoons on the side, but I started to be a graphic designer working within journalism. So I was a graphic designer at the New York Times for a little bit, and it was very unglamorous. Like I was a web designer, like I was coming up with like CSS and that kind of stuff. But then I started working as a media producer at the Center for Investigative Reporting as a freelancer, which is out of Berkeley. And I started to do animated kind of explainers for them. And I enjoyed that process. And I kind of maybe felt like during that time period, I would like to do something that like when I was working on those things with other people, I kind of wished I'd also been writing the script and doing the journalism of it. And so I maybe got a little bit of the bug from that. But also one of my old friends is Aaron Wickenden, and Aaron is the lead editor on Feels Good Man, and he's a producer on it. And Aaron is, you know, we met when we were in our early 20s and just kind of like, you know, doing whatever. And then Aaron has slowly become this amazing doc editor. He edited the Mr. Rogers film. He edited Finding Vivian Meier. He edited this amazing film called The Interrupters that I would encourage anyone to seek out. And so I think talking to Aaron really gave me a sense of confidence that I could make this thing, because I knew that I had kind of Aaron to help shepherd me through the process. Because making a documentary film, you really need amazing editors. You know, they're the people that help shape it. You know, I was a painting major. Painting's an additive project. Making a documentary is actually the opposite. It's like more like being a sculptor. You're taking away, you collect all this, you collect this pile of stuff, and then you chip away at the things that you want to keep. So it was really leaning on Aaron, and then also Giorgio Angelini, who's become like, you know, one of my best friends, and was in the trenches every day during Feels Good Man. And he's someone who is a very like upbeat person. He's a very like sort of intellectually nimble person. And we had a lot of great talks while making this. And it was really just like this collaboration that I think we all felt like a real passion about. So yeah, that's my path in. And I have to say, I love it. Like the documentary community that I've found as part of making Feels Good Man, the people I've met along the way, I do feel like I've kind of found my people. And you know, I'm someone who's in my 40s, and I feel like I'm just figuring it out now. And so that's been like a great sort of second gift as well too. Like, oh, I have this new thing I'm excited about. This is so great. So yeah.
That is an unparalleled feeling of that. Okay, this is my little niche now. I got it. You know,
And I don't think I would have been a good documentarian at 20, but I think I'm a pretty good documentarian at 40. You know what I mean? Like it's something that I think it just took. I'd always thought my resume was like kind of like scattered and fucked up and didn't lead to anything. I was like, I've dabbled in all these things, but it turned out that all of those things kind of led to Feels Good Man. So that was cool.
As someone with a scattered and fucked up resume myself, I have found those are the things that you look back and you're like, oh, that actually was really good. That kind of worked out how it was supposed to.
Yeah, the dots connect in an unconventional way, but
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's bring it. So what I'll do for these questions, I want to invite people so that they have the chance to join the panel and speak. Now, if you're not comfortable speaking, you can, you know, say so, and I'll read the question for you. You're obviously not required to put on your video if you don't want to, but we're going to start with, it looks like Eilish Turner, or Eilish Turner, I'm sorry, I feel like I just butchered your name. Let's see, where are you? Here we go. So I'm promoting you to panelist now, and you are free to turn on your video and ask your question.
Don't be shy.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I muted myself. I'll see if. Oh, there I am. Okay.
Oh, there we are. Oh, what are those, petunias? Morning glories?
I think
what are
they're those? Cherry blossoms.
Oh.
Which I thought was cute. But yeah, first of all, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed this. Like, actually, it was incredibly interesting, and as an animator, I loved the animations and the motion design.
Cool.
I wanted to put that out there.
Well, you should seek out the animators who helped me on, like Jenna Caravello and Kylan Woodrow and Nicole Stafford. They were the cartoonists and animators who helped me make all those animations, and they're all amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to say that first of all. But yeah, my question was, I am obviously a younger person, and I was only like, you know, probably 10 in like 6th grade when I first heard of Pepe.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious to know a lot of you did show like videos from that younger, sort of primarily female, like normie audience.
Mhm.
But I'm curious to know, did you like interview a lot of younger people directly? And do you think that would have sort of changed the framework of the documentary a little bit? Like, I like the way that it was presented. Personally, I thought that was the best way to go about it, but I'm curious to know, like in your research, how their perspectives change, because I considered myself very online, but I think being a young female online, I was more active on like Tumblr and Neopets and those sorts of
Mhm.
sites.
Mhm.
I didn't even know what 4chan was until I was like a junior in high school.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious to know a little bit more about that and how that contributed to like how you perceived the popularization of Pepe into like the mainstream. You know what I mean? Yeah.
No, I know that's a great question, and no one's kind of I've done a lot of Q&As about the film at this point, and no one's kind of placed it in that context. So we did talk to a number of people who were maybe a little bit younger while making the film, and it was kind of actually pretty revealing. It was interesting. We actually as part of the exploratory process of making the film, we happened to be in Washington, D.C. during the March for Our Lives, which is the sort of post-Parkland protest. And we did a lot of man on the street or person on the street interviews. And it was interesting to talk to people who maybe weren't even of voting age in 2016. And it was a very like diverse, interesting, excited group of people who wanted to talk to us. And very few of them had any negative baggage attached to Pepe. You know, we talked to people who were like 17, 16, and most of them were like, oh yeah, that's oh yeah, that's just the funny stone frog. They weren't even necessarily aware of the sort of alt-right co-opting of Pepe. And maybe it was because we were at this March for Our Lives and it tended to be like a slightly leftier audience. But I think your point about Tumblr is correct. In 2015, the Daily Dot reported that Pepe was the most popular meme on Tumblr. And that was the same time that all this stuff was going on in 4chan. And it was definitely, in the making of Feels Good Man, we tried to simplify the story as much as possible, down to sort of like the sort of the definitive truth of it. It was basically like these guys did not like women, but that was part of Tumblr coming into 4chan. It was part of Gamergate, which we did not want to get into the weeds of for a variety of reasons, and so yeah, I think that was a part of it. But it's been interesting to we were able to screen the film at the True False Film Festival in Columbia, Missouri, which is a college town, and we had an amazing turnout, which was awesome. And half of the crowd was like a slightly older audience, because that's frankly the kind of people that mostly go to documentary film festivals. But the other half was like a younger audience that that had come because it was the Pepe movie. And for them, it played like a youth culture movie. It played like a punk rock documentary. It was people who had like observed Pepe from growing up very online. And, even if they weren't participating in the stuff that we got into in the film, they observed it and they felt like that they had like witnessed it, and maybe they'd been disturbed by it, or they'd like been in there for a minute and then moved out of it. And so, yeah, it definitely plays differently to different audiences. So I don't know, did the movie ring true to you at all, or how did you sort of feel about it watching it?
Yeah, it was actually very interesting to me because I guess I joined in on the normie end of things, because when I was on Tumblr at that point, Pepe was co-opted to be very cute and very wholesome and like that sort of meme aesthetic. Like it was more of like the classic, like, you know, mentally ill teenagers, venting online sort of thing.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
I was actually a lot more wholesome in that regard. And then when I got to high school and I learned what Reddit and 4chan was, it did take on a little bit of a different meaning. So yeah, it was definitely very interesting as well, because I think, like a lot of other people, I didn't know that he was from a comic until much later. I didn't know like the more wholesome history of it. Um, and I think it's very funny to look at it from like, I guess, sort of the youth culture perspective, because when I first heard about it, I was into the rare Pepes, but I think in a different way than a lot of the grown men who were into rare Pepes.
Yeah.
I saw it as like, I mean, I was literally like 10, I was playing Pokemon. I saw it as like collecting Pokemon, like it was cute and funny and you trade them with your friends in that regard, and not like dropping thousands of dollars on this funny Nazi frog. Like, was very different. So it's really interesting to see it. Like, I don't know, yeah, definitely it was really interesting to see this from all those different.
Yeah. Well, the guys who are dropping the money on the frog, admittedly, are the kind of like, in a documentary, you try to find like the most interesting characters within a
Yeah.
subculture, and they obviously are sort of um, in their own particular space, but they created that rare Pepe economy based on the thing you're talking about. And, so like even that is kind of a joke. Like the idea of that, I think that was the other reason that Pepe proliferated so much, though, was because of this other like fan culture and collecting culture. And so people would obviously talk about rare Pepes, and we didn't get too deeply into this in the film, but the rare Pepe thing was always a joke. It was a funny thing that I think was, for the most part, wholesome, even on 4chan. And I know wholesome has taken on also a whole different kind of like layered meaning in the last few years. And I think it's also kind of interesting to point out, like, Matt's comics aren't necessarily wholesome. They have like an irreverence. And even though they kind of predate a lot of the extremely online culture of now, there's a part of Matt's comics that are very similar to like teenagers spending a lot of time online. They eat junk food, that they basically live in their room. It's all about like farts and dabbling in drugs, but in a very like kind of innocent, sweet way. It's kind of just about like experimentation. And so I understand, like, even if you didn't know about Boys Club, maybe you were just picking up on the innate vibe of Pepe and the Boys Club kind of like ethos, just, subtextually. But that's cool. That's interesting to hear. There is also just a thing where people are excited to talk about memes. Like, people, I think we had a hard time getting the film made because people are like, this is about a meme, this is about a frog JPEG. And it's like, no, people are actually excited to see a movie about a meme. Like, this is something that people are, they know, like, people who are younger understand this is a big story, in a way that maybe people who are, my age don't. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really insightful, and it is a very interesting subject matter. I guess my last thing, I promise, is
Sure. No, that's great.
it's also very interesting because I feel like the ways in which 4chan and Reddit and that side and Tumblr used Pepe were actually very similar in a lot of ways. And I actually feel like the demographics, they don't like to think that they're very similar, but they really are. Like,
can you elaborate on that? How are they similar?
In the sense that not so much the ideology, like a lot of Tumblr obviously is very anti-Nazi in that sort of sense, but I think it's more the idea that the demographics are very online people, very big into like fandom and fan bases, feeling very lonely. Like, I feel like for 4chan, it's a lot of especially young men who feel very out of place in society, and on Tumblr it was a lot of young, mostly women, but also a lot of queer young people who feel very out of place, and it's sort of like these online communities that form around this like very specific identity based off of the website that they're on. And I found that very interesting as well. Obviously the ideologies are very different in a lot of ways, but like the way that they post and the humor that comes from the sites are kind of similar in a lot of ways. Like, there's a lot of crossover in the surrealism and like post-ironic stuff.
Yeah.
Like that.
And they are creative communities. They're both creative communities. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, and I will say, like, 4chan is like, I think the ideologies are very opposed, and that was a lot of what you saw in that moment. It was definitely a Tumblr versus 4chan thing. But 4chan within its edge does have a pretty diverse cast of people who use it. Like, there's a lot of trans kids on 4chan. There's a lot of gay kids on 4chan. And they're kids that maybe don't want to necessarily be part of whatever mainstream version of that self-identity is. They want to be the edgiest outsider within that subculture. But, you know, we do also see like, you know, Matt was like an outsider kid in his 20s making Boys Club. And that was a different kind of more Gen X era where, you know, being in a subculture meant you were moving to a big city, you were living in probably like a kind of a bad neighborhood, you were making art or music or hanging at the bar with your pals. And now it's actually the definitions of subculture have moved really, really deeply online. But yeah, I think, yeah, all of what you're saying rings true to me. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a very interesting discussion. And I feel like I would watch this with my friends in the future again.
Oh, that's nice to
It's
hear. Thank
just,
you.
yeah, I feel like it would be very interesting to see a lot of different reactions. But
Yeah, no, I would yeah, that would be great. Thank you for turning on your camera and asking like a great question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Eilish. That
Yeah.
was great. I appreciate you asking such good questions. We're gonna move you back to the attendee now. And then we have one that wants to be read off camera, so I'll just quickly read it for
Sure thing.
this is from MFA production grad Dustin Jacobs, who just wants you to reflect on how surreal it was to see someone's art be sort of transformed in this way and be used in a way it wasn't intended in the hands of the masses.
You know, I mean, I think as an artist, I think it's always this new double-edged sword we all have to deal with. There was this one, I think, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, you would have a different discussion about what it was like to put yourself out in the world as an artist. And was this more of a like, it was this philosophical discussion that was maybe a little bit older, where it's like, oh, is it the death of the artist? Once you put something out into the world, it belongs to the world and that's it. But the reality is now is like, pretty much for any of us to survive in this gig economy is you really have to kind of almost approach yourself as a brand, which is kind of heartbreaking, I think, to a lot of people who are innately creative, you know. But there were times in 2016 and 2017 where I observed people who would encounter Matt and assume he was a neo-Nazi because they had recognized Pepe as having all of these negative baggage. They'd be like, they would see his work and they'd recognize like, oh, this is the Nazi frog guy. Oh shit. Like they wouldn't necessarily realize that, you know, Matt was the polar opposite of that. And so it was something where I think Matt, actually, there was a part of Matt that probably would feel more comfortable just staying away from all of these discussions and continuing to make his work. And he, as an artist, maybe you could have done that in a previous generation, but he couldn't, because it actually just like sabotaged any hope for him to make a living and provide for his family. So you have to have like all of these different calculations as you put yourself out there, because you have to put yourself out there to make yourself known and to get work and gigs and all this stuff. And then there's also a part of you that, you know, what could happen to Pepe could happen to any of us if you just put yourself out there, you know, you know, that's just kind of the way things move now. It's like culture is this endlessly ricocheting bullet and you don't know what's going to happen when. So, yeah.
And just how it went the other way too, where all, you know, at the end, there's this whole following that reappropriated it basically.
Yeah, and I have to say, it's been very interesting. We finished this film in January, and you know, taking it out into the world, people always ask questions like, "Oh, the negative backlash and all this." Well, the opposites happened. Like, it's been very extremely positive. There's been people who came up within 4chan or came up within these communities, and they're like, "Oh, this movie was actually like," you know, people feel encouraged by the film, which is something that was something we'd hoped for, and that's great. People also feel like they're ready for a nuanced conversation about how the internet is affecting all of us, and that's cool. And I think it's also really appealed to a generation of makers, people who are thinking very actively about how to put what they make out into the world. And you're right, I think there's a chance for the end of the film to maybe just underline this point that we have agency within this. And then also, you know, so since we've taken the film out, like Twitch, Pepe has now had a whole other like crazy life on Twitch since we got done with the movie. It's had a different life on TikTok. It continues to move around the world in like unexpected ways. So yeah, it's an ever-changing thing. And for whatever reason, it's the one thing on the internet that has stuck around for over 10 years. It's crazy.
Which is so wild.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for just one or two more. Let's do.
Let's power through them. If people want to hear more, I can be a little shorter with my
Yeah,
answers.
we have this CAM student, Clara Madenwald. Sorry, that's Cinema Media Studies.
Oh, okay.
So let's bring her panelist.
Oh, Clara, can you unmute?
There you go. Got it.
Great.
Like everybody else, I really enjoyed the movie, and I just want to start with that. But I was kind of curious about, there's a lot of movies, and we're going to see a lot more of them right now, like living in this Zoom era about like the internet.
Mhm.
And I feel like a lot of movies about the internet just like don't get it right, and it just feels so ungenuine and like not how teenagers talk, or like that's just not how the internet acts. And so I was wondering like how you approach this film and telling the story in a way that felt like genuine and authentic to like internet culture and like the evolution of this meme and just, all these crazy things.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I was someone that, like I said before, was not necessarily participating in internet culture. I think we did not think about this maybe as like, well, first off, we knew that we couldn't be like preachy or pedantic in this movie at all, because that's just not what the internet wants. I think we had to like just sort of like say what we say and then move on. And I think that was kind of like, I wanted the film to feel like you'd opened up a million different tabs in your browser and then you were clicking kind of through them one at a time. That was something that we talked about a lot. Like, I mean, I think in terms of just thinking about maybe, being a student and thinking about process, this was a film that really rewarded a tremendous amount of revisions being made. It'd be like, oh, this edit works, but how do we make it better? How do we make it faster? And then that was a big part of it. We wanted to make very tight turns in the editing. And each of those turns, we wanted to have like different layers. So for instance, like the section with Matt Furie approaching the Anti-Defamation League, that obviously had all sorts of different layers of importance because you've seen the whole film before. But, the final shot with that is you see like the cameraman taking off the guy's mic. There was always this element of like, all right, there's an element of critique and removal from this. And that was something that we were very conscious about in the making of the film. And then, we also didn't want to talk down to people. We didn't want to explain every little thing. Like, we didn't want to like go in and like enumerate all the different sort of like stuff that was going on in the film. We wanted to trust the viewer to have like a base level of sort of internet literacy and then move on from there. And I think that was kind of important to us. And then we also just realized Pepe was like, the thing we wanted to talk about was not necessarily the capital I internet, but it was the way emotions travel on the internet between groups of people who live very far apart from each other. But how do these emotional groups coalesce online and kind of create this like very intense groupthink? And I think a lot of the films, I watched a lot of movies about the internet. And I think this is also instructive for young filmmakers and young creators, is watch things that you don't like and then pull apart the reasons why you don't like them. And so I would watch those and be like, I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't want to make the same mistake. And so that was like a very instructive thing for us making the film as well. And, and then I kind of I knew we wanted to make the film fast. So I developed this, like, we developed two different mantras kind of in the edit. And the first mantra was follow the thin green line. And that was that was our editorial notions. Like, we always have to tie things back to Pepe. We can't let the story spin too far out, bring it back to Pepe. And then the other thing I was like, we can't ever make this movie perfect, but we can make it interesting. And so in any edit, I would just be like, maybe an imperfect edit is actually better than a perfect edit. Let's keep it shaggier and more interesting, because we wanted people to make connections for themselves. So yeah, that's kind of, that's what we were thinking. Is there anything within that you have another question about?
No, I think that answers it. Just kind of not talking down to your audience and like having a base level of knowledge. I mean, we're all on the internet, so we all have a little bit of knowledge. So
yeah,
thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking the question.
Thanks, Okay, so I think we have time. There's just one last question that I'll ask on her behalf here, which is from Adriana Lopez. She wants to know about what Matt's reaction was like to seeing Hong Kong be brought back to life in the form of young people fighting for democracy in Hong Kong. And you could also, since that's sort of alluded to in the movie, I would also add kind of just where he's at now in his sort of journey.
Yeah, I'll say that, it's been interesting to have something move out of like an acquaintance to friendship to kind of like Matt didn't really put any guardrails on us as filmmakers. He really just let us into his life. The one thing he just told me before making the film was make sure the animations don't suck. And so we worked a little with Matt on the animations, but Matt and Ayana and his friends were very generous. I think they realized for this to be like an artistically relevant film that they couldn't like manage it at all. And that's not really Matt's style. Matt's a very like live and let live kind of dude. Matt obviously felt encouraged by Hong Kong and people's attachment to the character in Hong Kong, and I will also say like the reason that stuff happened in Hong Kong was because Pepe was very popular in places all over Asia and all over the world. But, Pepe is popular without any of the negative baggage in Korea and Malaysia and Singapore and all these places. I do think Matt's relationship to the film has evolved since we premiered it. At Sundance, I think Matt felt really overwhelmed by the film. I think he's someone who is a private person. He's someone that a part of Matt likes to be paid attention to, but a part of Matt really wants to step out of the spotlight. And being in the spotlight was overwhelming for him. And for me as a filmmaker, that was the thing I was most nervous about. We went to Sundance and I spent the entire time watching Matt watch the film. And afterwards, he was crying and he was over. I couldn't tell if those were tears of joy or tears of sadness. And we've worked through all of the complicated feelings with the film and continue to. But I think the fact that it's been such a positive experience and Matt has gotten a chance to talk to all these people who are actually inspired by Matt was something that I don't think Matt was predicting. I think we were all maybe like expecting a kind of like backlash or maybe more of a cynical take on the movie, but the reality is the people who like this movie because they see like a story that is hopeful and also malleable. And often the people that like the movie are artists and they take something away from it that's surprising. And so I think we've both kind of grown from it being out in the world. And I will also say, I'm going to plug a little bit, but part of the release of the film was also we had Fantagraphic release a book of Matt's artwork called Mind Viscosity. So if anyone wants to pick up Mind Viscosity, it has a bunch of very beautiful, very fun, non-Pepe. There's a couple Pepes in here actually, because Matt can't help it. He always draws Pepe, but it's a lot of like other Matt artwork from the last 10 years that I love. And if you liked his artwork in the movie, maybe you should check it out. I don't know.
So great. I think that's a good note to end on since we've exceeded our time a bit. Arthur, thank you so much for taking such time with us and giving such thoughtful answers. The film's great. How can people see it and spread the word about it?
So I will say there's one last question coming in from Alex A. We were able to screen it 3 different film festivals before it ended, and they were great. They were great. They were really fascinating. Like I was talking to one of the previous questioners. Yeah, it was great to see an older audience and a younger audience interact with the film in different ways. And for me personally, I always thought like this film was about starting a discussion. So the thing I think you can do first and foremost is have a discussion with your friends about Pepe and the movie. I would encourage people to rent it. It's available for rent. And we're an independent film. We're putting this out ourselves. We always get this question like, why is it on Netflix? Well, Netflix didn't want to put it on Netflix. So we're releasing it ourselves in the same way we started making it. It's just Giorgio and me. We're taking it out and we're excited that it's finding an audience. So yeah, I would, if you feel comfortable to post about it, that would be great, but just encourage your friends to see it. We were the second most pirated film after Mulan this summer. So that's been a mixed bag for all of us. It's nice that people are fascinated, but it's not exactly helping our bank account. So so yeah, any support you have, that'd be great. Pick up Matt's book, follow us on social media. Yeah.
Well,
So.
thanks so much for being here, to you, Arthur, and also to all of you joining us. Yes, please spread the word and share it on Facebook. And really enjoyed talking to you. This has been really great.
Yeah, thanks for the great questions, and yeah, great chat. So hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks so much.
So absolutely, take care, everybody.